Good afternoon. Let's get everything clicking in place, I hope. Not. And YouTube is still working on it. A little bit more. A little bit up. Oh, let's get them close. And a couple more clicks, and then we'll be ready to actually study. All right. Good morning to everyone. Oh, sorry, the clock has gone past noon. It is good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining me as we dive into Parashat Shoftim. We are going to pick up here in chapter 19, and there's a long stretch of Torah that we're going to go into. I've covered this in other classes, so go back and look in the back catalog. But we need it as a little bit of a run-up, which hopefully I will justify by the time we get to the end. But let's go ahead and jump in. We're not going to do too many digressions as we go through the first portion of Torah here, but I'll try to explain a few things as we go along, just as needed for today's discussion. Chapter 19, verse 1. When Adonai your God cuts off the nations whose land Adonai your God is giving you, and you dispossess them and settle in their towns and in their houses, 3 towns you are to separate for yourselves in the midst of your land that Adonai your God is giving you to possess. So it's a time-bound commandment to be established during this time of the conquest. Measure yourself the way and divide in 3 the territory of your land that Adonai your God is causing you to inherit. It shall be for fleeing there, for every, parentheses, accidental murderer. All right, so what we are getting here are 3 cities of refuge, as they're going to be technically called. And these cities of refuge are ostensibly put there for accidental murder. Now, the reason the accidental has to be put into parentheses, of course, is because that word doesn't occur in the original Hebrew. It just says murderer. However, as we know that the murder legislation is quite important in Jewish law, these would not be refuges, sanctuaries for actual murderers. Therefore, in light of what's about to come in the next few verses, Fox put the word accidental here so as not to confuse the reader. I should point out that if you are familiar with where this goes, then of course we wouldn't actually be confused because we know that even an actual murderer who goes to one of these cities is not going to be offered sanctuary when the evidence is brought against him. Verse 4. Now, this is the matter of the murderer who flees there, that he may stay alive, who strikes down his neighbor with no foreknowledge, nor did he bear hatred toward him from yesterday and the day before. Meaning, this is a murder that happens out of the blue. In modern English, we would probably call this manslaughter. I'm not an expert on American law, but I'm pretty sure that's the equivalent that we would have, where you have taken someone's life, but it was not done with malicious intent, nor was it done with awareness that this was what you were about to commit. So how would we do this? Well, in verse 5, or how would we not do this, right? Who comes upon his neighbor in the forest chopping wood, and his hand swings away with an axe to cut wood, and the iron part is dislodged from the wood part and reaches his neighbor so that he dies. So the head of the axe flies off the handle, very understandable. Unfortunately, the trajectory leads it right into someone else. That person dies. The person who accidentally killed him, the original chopper, is now running to one of these cities of refuge. Now, why will he stay alive? Well, lest the blood redeemer, which is a relative of the deceased, pursue the murderer, since his heart is hot-blooded, and overtake him, since the journey is long, and strikes his life, though his is not a judgment of death, since he has not borne hatred toward him from yesterday and the day before. So the person coming after him, all he knows, all he cares about is my relative was killed and it's your fault. Therefore, I am going to avenge him on you. And this is a unfortunately natural instinct to respond in this manner. And perhaps in some prehistoric time, this was even a necessary instinct, dare we imagine, for how it became so universal in many places. But it is not the correct instinct. However, saying that it's not the correct instinct doesn't save the accidental murderer from being murdered, and it would only multiply the transgressions within the community. So we need to have cities that are near enough, geographically spaced out, that anybody that has an accident like this will be close enough that they can get to a place to find sanctuary until the entire issue can be sorted out. And that's what's going on here. And of course, along the way, it points out that the penalty for an accidental death is not execution. And therefore, this extrajudicial killing by the avenger of the family is not permitted. But again, that is cold comfort if they actually catch him before he gets to sanctuary. So we need these cities of refuge. Verse 7, therefore, I command you, saying, 3 towns you are to separate for yourself. That's why we have these 3 separate towns. Now, if Adonai your God should broaden your territory, as he swore to your fathers, and give you all the land that he promised to give your fathers, indeed, you are to keep all this commandment by observing it, that I command you today, to love Adonai your God and to walk in his ways all these days. And you are to add for yourself another 3 towns to these 3. So if we expand the territory that is under Israel's control, under the Davidic or the Solomonic eras, for example, when Israel reached its maximum borders, well, then people living in those new border areas may now be too far from the original 3 cities, so additional cities of refuge would be established. Why? So that the blood of the innocent not be shed amid your land, that Adonai your God is giving you as an inheritance, and there be blood guilt upon you. Now, as we'll see also at other times when we read through the Torah, it's a little surprising to us in the modern world, but Judaism believes quite strongly that the death of any of us is a responsibility of all of us. That doesn't mean that each person in a society bears the same amount of blood guilt as the person who actually pulls the trigger or swings the sword, but it does mean that we as a society have not done enough to prevent such things from happening. In this particular case, if we were not to have these cities of refuge, then the innocent manslaughterer who is now murdered by the avenger would be our fault, because we were told that this was a probability, this was a danger, and we did nothing to try and prevent it. And thus, we as a society would also be to blame, although obviously the actual avenger who murdered the person would be even more to blame. It's not about saying who is the chief culprit and therefore the rest of us are off the hook. It's finding the proper distribution of blame, but even more important, finding the proper way to avoid the crime from occurring in the first place. And seeing it as being our shared responsibility is that first step. Verse 11. But if it should be, opposite case, that a man bears hatred towards his neighbor and waits in ambush for him and rises up against him and strikes his life so that he dies, and he flees to one of these towns. So here we have the actual murderer, somebody just waiting in the forest and going, ha, got you. Well, and he runs away to one of these towns. What are we going to do? The elders of his town are to send and have him taken from there, meaning the court will follow him. They are to give him into the hand of the blood redeemer so that he dies. There will be an execution once it has been established that indeed he is a premeditated murderer. Your eye is not to take pity on him, so shall you eradicate the innocent blood from Israel, and it will be well with you. Innocent blood, dam hanaki here, is referring to the blood of the innocent, would probably be an easier English translation. It's blood that has been spilt innocently, not like blood that was spilled for correct reasons, such as self-defense or a properly carried out execution. So that's our basic description of the laws of accidental and premeditated murder. And I feel like I'm about to sneeze, so hold on. Sometimes talking about it makes it go away. Nope. Not that time. Okay, so sometimes it just overtakes. All right, so that's the whole first 13 verses of this chapter. Like I said, I've covered this in much more detail elsewhere. Obviously, as always, go to additional commentaries for a lot more information here. There is a great subtlety and importance, an understanding about the value of human life. However, we need this to understand better what comes in verse 14 and what's going to come in verse 15, because it's going to feel like we are now jumping completely to a random topic, almost like somebody was cutting and pasting and oops, forgot that they'd put two texts together and didn't bother to put any connective tissue. Well, that's a very modern way of editing things. It is not the Torah way. The Torah puts things next to each other, sometimes in a way that is providing a shotgun pattern of themes, but very often there are implicit connections, ligatures between these texts. So let's go ahead and take a look at verse 14 and 15, and we'll begin to tease those out. You are not to move back the border of your neighbor that the first one set as border in your inheritance that you inherit in the land that Adonai your God is giving you to possess. All right, so we can begin to hypothesize why verse 14 is coming here. One is because if you go all the way back to the beginning of chapter 19, the beginning of the accidental murder section, then we are reminded that we are coming into a land that we are inheriting, and it's all about establishing these three cities within the borders and then three cities within the expanded borders. And here, as long as we're talking about borders, let's remember that moving borders is a really, really bad thing. And we're going to talk about in our commentary about one of the problems with moving these borders. But it does actually follow on, if only for that reason, that having the proper jurisdiction markers of the territory would be crucial, if only for what we just read, because if somebody is fleeing, they need to know where the closest city is. And that needs to be something that is correct, because otherwise they may not reach the city in time and will be struck down, and that will multiply murder. And now we as a society have failed because somebody moved the marker. Now, on the other hand, often people will read verse 14 as simply being another prohibition on theft. We know that we're not supposed to steal someone's money. We're not supposed to steal their livestock. But what about property? Well, I can't just steal someone's land, can't I? I mean, it's not like I can just walk up and scoop up the field and carry it back to my field. That doesn't work. However, what does work, and if you've ever lived in a farming community or even had arguments with neighbor about where the fence line is, you may know that theft of property is absolutely possible simply by adjusting where the border is between different territories. And so this could be another type of theft. And perhaps it comes here as a similar type of a crime that might be committed as the bloodshed that was mentioned before. As I said, we will come back to this in our commentary. And then verse 15, maybe even easier to relate to what we've discussed so far. One witness alone shall not rise up against a man for any case of iniquity or for any case of sin, in any sin that he sins. And yes, that sounds perfectly fine in the Hebrew. I know it sounds weird in the English. They're foreign languages. At the mouth of two witnesses or at the mouth of three witnesses, a legal matter is to be established. So that's how we establish things, is with multiple witnesses. Now, why is this important? Well, in the first half of the chapter, we've already talked about the case of involuntary manslaughter or of premeditated murder, and differentiating between them has to do with whether the person was lying in wait, whether the person had a history of animosity, of how the actual deed was carried out. Well, witnesses are going to be essential for that. It's not as though we can go check their voicemail and text messages. We can't go back and look at their Facebook posts to figure out their personality and attitude or possible premeditation. We're going to have to rely on testimony. And this is telling us that from the outset, you can't make testimony if you just have one person. And we're going to talk about that extensively of why that's a problem, because when we think about it, it actually seems kind of incongruous that it should be a problem. I mean, after all, there are some people we should believe, right? Testimony of respected members of the community, of those who have been given great responsibility or authority, or if we can't believe them in general, well, I mean, if we can't believe them to be a witness, then why are we giving them this authority in the first place? But we will come back to that in much more detail. Let's just finish off this section. When there arises a witness of malice against a man testifying against him by defection from God, and the two men who have quarreled stand before the presence of Adonai, before the presence of the priests or the judges who are there in those days, the judges are to inquire well. And if here a false witness is the witness, falsely has he testified against his brother, you are to do to him as he schemed to do to his brother. So shall you eradicate the evil from your midst. So this final bit of testifying information is saying that, yes, we have to have a court, we have to have rigorous examination of our witnesses, and in particular, because we are so reliant upon witness testimony, we have to be very, very careful to weed out false witnesses. And these Edim Zomamim, as they are technically called, is the thorn in the entire process. If people are able to successfully collude to put testimony against a person, bringing at least two now, because we've established that as a requirement, but two people conspire, can still both lie. If that succeeds, if that is something we don't find out, then we are going to have a mockery of justice. And so the punishment is being laid out here very clearly in verse 19, which is, if somebody is in this collusion to try and lie about what's going on, then their punishment is not fixed. It is a relative punishment. If they are colluding to rob somebody by lying about a contract out of 100 shekels, then they are going to have to pay 100 shekels. If they are colluding to lie about, who owns this piece of land, then they will have to be bereft of some property or equivalent amount. If they are colluding about murder, saying, oh yeah, he murdered him, and the penalty based on their testimony, if accepted, would be the death of an innocent person, then they are executed. The penalty for perjury is proportional to the weight of the case that they are perjuring themselves over. So this is a very powerful deterrent for false witnesses. You're not going to get a slap on the wrist. You're not going to be sent to jail for, a few days. You're not going to be given a tiny fine or even a large fine. As you are testifying, you are opening yourself up to whatever punishment the person you are testifying against would receive. This, of course, even makes honest witnesses a little more careful in what they are doing, knowing that if they are false, simply by overstating what they actually know, for example, then they too could be in big trouble. Even if not exactly the same punishment, they would understand the severity of what they are doing. All right. That is the only Torah we're going to look at for today. Now let's look at some commentary about it. Let me just check our YouTube group, make sure nobody is asking any questions there. It's fine. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about this question of the borders. Now, that seems, as I mentioned, kind of like slotted into the middle here. We're talking about moving border markers for property when we were talking about involuntary murder and then doing all of the witnessing to properly convict or exonerate. What is this doing here? Well, Chizkuni gives, I think, a very nice summary of a consensus opinion. The reason why this legislation about the borders has been written here, when, as the editor points out, on the face of it, it is not related to what preceded it, is that most serious disagreements resulting in bloodshed have their origin in disputes over borders. This is why immediately afterwards, we also have the line at the bottom of the chapter, an eye for an eye, a life for a life, etc. We also have the warning not to convict anyone on the basis of testimony of only a single witness. All right, so Chizkuni is, I think, very neatly stitching this all together, giving us a little bit more of a narrative. It's talking about somebody who is either involuntarily murdering someone or actually murdering. And when we talk about an actual murderer, we're saying, okay, but why might a person commit murder? Well, what is one of the most fundamental sources of arguments within the ancient world that leads to a level of actual murderous violence? Well, it's arguing over where the property line is. Between my house and your house, between our village and your village, between our country and their country. These are disputes that will be the most likely to escalate into bloodshed. We can argue about, whose sheep this is or whose cloak that is, but those have less staying power to continue the feud up to the point of escalation. And note here, it could even be that the person who moved the marker is now being hunted by the person who has been wronged, that is taking out their revenge by murdering them. That doesn't exonerate the murderer. Hirskuni is explaining the motivation of the murderer and is saying that we need to be as punctilious about those border markers as the Torah is demanding, precisely because this is a way to prevent murder. As we talked about before, the community as a whole is responsible. If we treat this as a trivial case, not really worth our time or investment, or if people feel they have no way to redress this problem other than to take the matter into their own hands, then we as a society have failed, and there will be more bloodshed. And it may be bloodshed against an actual bad person, the person who moved the markers, but that's still not the way we want our community to be regulated. So this reminder of the dangers of moving the markers and what it can do to a community is prescient for how communities actually behave. Of course, it's also rather important that it comes at this time, because here we are in the Midbar, or almost the Midbar, actually, at this point in the Torah, and we are just about ready to cross into the land of Israel. Up till this point, the Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, have not had property lines to worry about for a number of generations. While they were slaves in the land of Egypt, this was not a major concern. So trying to make sure that they understand that this is not just a, well, you can fiddle a little bit. What's the difference between that and any other stealing? This is trying to make sure that they will take this seriously from the beginning, as well as, of course, take the actual divvying up of the land very seriously when that time comes. Okay, but let's get to the what I consider to be the main event for today, which is discussing this requirement of having more than one witness. And we will, as we often do, look to Sefer HaChinuch for a summary of many of the ideas that are found in this commandment. So we have been prevented from establishing the parameters of a punishment upon the body of convicted. And likewise, that we not extract money according to the testimony of one witness, even if he is the most fit and wise, or even if he is a prophet. And about this it is stated, our verse, one witness shall not rise against a man for any iniquity or for any sin. All right, so take the profundity of that kind of statement. Right? We are not going to accept the testimony of one witness when it comes to executing somebody for murder or for handing over a payment that is believed to be owed because of one witness's testimony. We need at least two witnesses. We're going to talk about that a little bit more detail later, but we basically need two witnesses. Now, as I mentioned before, the counterexample would be, well, but what if he's a really, really good witness? What if this is the most fit, the most wise? Everybody universally respects, everybody universally loves this person. What if this is a prophet? Isaiah himself stands up in the court and says, I saw him do it. Well, Deuteronomy tells us, okay, but that doesn't mean we convict. We don't rule in the favor of your testimony just because you said it, despite your status and your position. That is how firm this requirement of having more than one witnesses is. And as we'll see, that firmness is precisely because we are reluctant to hand over unchecked authority to even somebody that we respect to the utmost degree. As Sefer HaChinuch continues to explain, it is from the root of the commandment that it is, since the impulse of a man's heart is evil, and sometimes a passion comes to his heart against his fellow. So again, I'll try to translate the translation of the more awkward Hebrew in English. Basically, you know what? Sometimes people are jerks. Sometimes people are mean. Sometimes people will decide that they are owed X, Y, or Z, or that the person that they are testifying against deserves X, Y, and Z, that they're going to give it to them. And that will lead them to do this. And even if he is an extremely proper man, he is not saved from sometimes sinning, meaning just because you've been good and right and proper, don't think that you will be prevented from sinning in this way. You too are subject to these passions. You too are subject to these types of foibles. And you too can stumble this way. And the only way to prevent a person from from leading themselves into this type of sin is to actually build the judicial system to prevent the temptation of being able to say, I'm a good enough witness by myself. No, this way, not only do we prevent the victim of your false testimony from being harmed, we also prevent you from being tempted into causing that person harm in your fit of passion, your anger, or whatever feelings you may have. And he goes on, because this is a big deal. And even if a man stands for a very long time upon the ways of righteousness, it is not impossible for him to overturn his thoughts and to become bad. Somebody can be good for 60 years, righteous of the community. Everybody says there's never been a problem with this person. They have always been honest. They have been scrupulous. We have seen them time and time again act to their own detriment in order to do the right thing. Nevertheless, even a person such as that can sometimes go wrong. They can sometimes choose a different path at any point in their life. As behold, they, may their memory be blessed, in the Talmud said that Yochanan served in the high priesthood, and at the end of his long tenure, he turned into a Sadducee. They also said about him that he was at first a true prophet, and at the end, he became a false prophet. So even somebody who was so elevated that they could act as a prophet for God is not guaranteed to always remain of that level. And even more so, they can become a thoroughly corrupted individual. There is no such thing as a permanently righteous person that can be believed and accepted in all things for all time. Everybody is vulnerable. It doesn't mean everybody's bad, but everybody is vulnerable to being bad. And since everybody is vulnerable to being bad, we need to make sure that the borders of our justice system are set up in a way that someone will not be tempted to move that border, to cross across that line, and to lie, probably while justifying it to themselves, in a way that would be detrimental to the victim of their lies as well as to their own self, having now incurred this terrible sin. Hence, the thing is fit to not rely upon the heart of a man to punish his fellow according to his testimony. Even a good person, we don't say, do with him what you want. We use a system. And even if the convicted is a total evildoer and the most common of commoners and the one testifying is the greatest sage in Israel, we don't do it, right? It doesn't matter. So the person can fit the pattern of criminal. I mean, they can be wearing the stripy shirt and have a thing pulled down over their face, and the other guy can be the most saintly saint of all times, and that doesn't matter. When he points his finger, there better be another person pointing a finger, or else they are not going to be accepted as having brought valid testimony. We're not going to say, oh, well, look at that guy. Of course he probably did it. And I mean, over here, I mean, Frank is, Frank. Nope, not the way it works. And this type of an assumption is powerful about all things. As Sefer HaChinuch is telling us, understand this, that this is something that is embedded throughout Jewish jurisprudence for all the reasons that I have been explaining. It is not a casual thing to be set aside. It is not something that is a merely nice part of our legal system. This is foundational and fundamental. And for the reasons I mentioned, is also not just about judicial, but also theological, that we don't believe that any individual will be saved from sinning due to their past righteousness. We believe at any time any person, no matter how righteous they have been, nor how wicked they have been, can do the right thing in this instant. There is always that choice in front of us of doing right and doing good. And yes, some people can become very habituated to doing right, and some can be very habituated to doing wrong. But that doesn't mean that somebody who has done right 100 times in a row is going to do right again the next time. That is still up to them. And when it comes to basing our legal system on their testimony, we cannot rely on their past performance to just abdicate our responsibility for engaging in due diligent legal proceedings. Now, there's a few more things that Sefer HaChinuch wants to talk about on this, so we're going to continue, but I just want to see if there are any questions before we dive into that. Let's see if I can bring that up. Okay, everybody's very quiet today. That's okay. Let's go ahead then. Remember, after the video is done and it's up on YouTube, you can always ask me questions in the comments there or by email, or if you're a member of my community in person, when we next see each other. From the laws of the commandment is that which they, may their memory be blessed, said in the Talmud about one witness for any iniquity or for any sin. That is, when he does not rise. Meaning to say that we do not punish any person according to one witness, monetarily or corporeally. That is the understanding of iniquity or sin. So this phrase for any iniquity or sin means that this requirement regarding two witnesses is focused on an iniquity or a sin. And when they say that, that is what we mean about not rising. We don't have one witness rise for any of those types of activities. And what are those types of activities? Well, those are monetary crimes. So, I stole this or I didn't steal this, that kind of thing. Or corporeal crimes, which means, I punched someone or I didn't punch someone, and back to our main category of murder. So that's what they mean by iniquity or sin. However, but he does not rise for an oath, meaning to say that he obligates an oath for the one that he testifies about. So there is an alternative example. If a man said to his fellow, "Give me the 100 that I lent you," and the other answers, "I don't have anything of yours in my hand," and one witness testifies like the words of the claimant, the defendant is obligated to take an oath. So we cannot punish a person based upon the witness, the testimony of one witness. We can't take the money away from somebody on the testimony of one witness. However, we can require that person to swear an oath to God that they are telling the truth. And that can happen even if there is only one witness. Now, technically there is like 1.5, because we have the claimant, the person who says, "Give me back my money." And then we have the witness who says, "It is his money. I saw him loan it to him. I saw him promise to pay it back," whatever it might be. And those two aren't actually two witnesses, because obviously the claimant can't stand as an independent witness because he is touched by the matter. It's, a little compromised, if you will. And thus we also can't demand that the defendant hand over the money because we only have one independent witness. But because the phrase in the Torah refers specifically to iniquity or sin, that means more of these punishment type activities. For this one, we can use the single witness to at least demand that the person who is being defending their ownership in this case will swear that indeed this is their property. So this is one incident where one witness can make a difference. Now, notice again, the court can't rule in favor of the claimant on the basis of this witness, but the court can demand that the defendant justify themselves a little bit more strongly, because there is at least one person, again, untouched by the matter. It can't be like the brother of the claimant by the matter, that is giving a little bit more legs to the issue to say, okay, look, there's enough suspicion here. We need an oath. Now, if the person takes the oath, we don't do anything further. We don't say, "Oh, he's probably lying." That's, no, an oath is an oath and is considered acceptable. So the that nothing is being taken or transferred on the basis of one witness. It is merely asking for a higher level of statement by the person that is defending himself. And then there is another case. Let's see if I can get this whole paragraph on the page at once. Also, that which they said, that even though the Torah did not give believability to one witness to punish his fellow monetarily or corporeally, according to him, like we talked about, nonetheless, the single witness is believed for prohibitions. And like they said in many places, for example, in getting to be in the Talmud, one witness is believed with prohibitions. What does that mean? Right, we're not talking about testifying about a person. We're talking about testifying about the status of something. This is meaning to say, if a single witness testifies, this meat or this wine is forbidden or is fit, meaning kosher, he is believed. And so too it is regarding all that is similar to this with all the prohibitions of the Torah. So if somebody says, "Oh yeah, I saw the butcher when he did the shrita. That was some of the meat that he prepared. That meat's kosher." That is considered to be acceptable testimony. We don't need a second witness to corroborate that claim. So if he says that meat belongs to Frank, well, now we need two witnesses because we're talking about a monetary dispute here. But if he says that meat is kosher, then his testimony is believed, even if there was no one else that happened to be a witness to that particular thing. So there is room for one witness to make a difference in certain areas, but you'll notice that these are very peripheral, and that the primary concern of the community, where the burden lies on our shoulders to punish a person, that we need our double witness as a minimum. And then let's just get this ready for a couple more examples. And also that which may their memory be blessed said in the Talmud again, that with monetary cases, we accept individual testimony. How is that? One says he borrowed in front of me, and one said he admitted it in front of me. They are combined. So there is another way that a single witness can make a difference. And that's if each of them independently corroborate each other's information. So one of them says, "I saw him borrow that money from Tom." And another one comes along and says, "Oh yeah, I was over at his house and he was talking to me about how he had just borrowed money from Tom." Now they're testifying technically to two different things. One testified that he saw it happen, and one testifying that the defendant informed him that it had happened. But by his own lips, it's not hearsay, it's directly from him. Technically, those are two different things that are being testified about, but obviously the content is the same, which is he owes the money, and therefore their testimony is combined. That becomes the same as if each of them had been standing with the other for the other event, and so we have two combined witnesses, and he's going to have to pay it back. So there is that other way to take single witnesses and put them together. But you will notice that this is limited to monetary cases. So this is not the kind of way that you can build testimony regarding murder. And that which they, may their memory be blessed, said in Mishnah Torah, now we're in Rambam's great compilation of Jewish law, that the Torah believed one witness in two places, meaning that there are two places where one witness will change the outcome of a more punishment-oriented crime, with a suspected adulteress, known as the sota, that she not drink the bitter waters, and with a beheaded calf, that it should not be beheaded. This is the egel arufa. We break the neck of the cow in a place where a body is found, where we don't know who actually committed the murder. Let Sefer HaChinuch explain this, meaning to say, if one testifies that he knows about the killing of the one murdered, we do not behead the calf. As the Torah stated, coming up in Deuteronomy 21, not known, meaning that it wasn't known who did it, but behold, if someone comes forward and says, "I know who did it," then it is known to that one man. Now, what this means is that in both of these cases, the ceremony is not completed. we don't go through with the bitter waters, the sota ritual, and we don't go through with the beheading of the calf. It does not mean that the woman would be convicted as an actual adulteress, because we only have one witness. And it does not mean that the person who is being blamed for the murder would actually be executed on the testimony of one person. It just means we don't go through with the ritual. So in these instances, it is important that we follow them correctly. And part of their underlying structure is that there is ignorance, that nobody knows whether she did or didn't, and nobody knows whether or not he actually committed a murder. Therefore, once that is in doubt, then the entire ceremony is no longer appropriate to be conducted. But the punishment that would normally go along with having a witness to the crime is not incurred, because we don't have two witnesses to that crime. Okay, and then we have another situation where they will believe one witness, and the sages believed one witness that testifies for a woman that her husband has died, so that she not be anchored, not be an aguna. So if a woman is married and her husband dies overseas or in battle, but the body is not recovered or not produced, then there is a very real problem. Because as far as she knows and the community knows, he has just disappeared. He has vanished from the face of the earth. And that means she's married, but not married. She would be literally chained, anchored to a dead man. And there's no way for her to ever be released in that situation. But if someone comes to town and says, oh yeah, Frank, oh yeah, I'm so sorry, but you know, the pirates got Frank. I saw him get murdered by the pirates. Then even though it's only one witness that is testifying, that is sufficient for us to establish that he is dead, the husband, and that means that she is free to remarry at her own discretion, because she is no longer married in the meantime. Why do we believe this one witness? And they, may their memory be blessed, meaning the sages of the Mishnah and Talmud, said as the reason for this that she is very exacting after the truth in this, meaning she herself is not going to accept any old rubbish as evidence, as if she might perhaps marry as a result of this false information, and her first husband come afterwards, he wasn't actually dead, then she must exit from both marriages, because you can't stay married to the person that you can't stay with the person you're committing what is technically adultery with, and you're not allowed to stay married to the person you committed adultery against. And the offspring from the second relationship would be classified as a mamzer, which is a whole nother issue in Jewish law, but suffice to say, we don't want our kids to be a mamzer. So she is not going to accept testimony unless it is absolutely ironclad. Yes, this person is believable. It's not merely, oh, I saw someone vaguely matching your husband's description. No, 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 no. She is going to want to make sure it's very clear. And also that which they, may their memory be blessed, said, now Mishnah Torah again, that in every place that the testimony of one witness is effective, the testimony of a woman or someone disqualified for other reasons is also effective, except for the witness of an oath, as we only obligate an oath with the testimony of one witness. So it's a whole nother conversation, which also we've had at other times, depending upon who has studied with me in different places, where in the ancient world, women, because they were beholden to the patriarchal power structure, meaning that their livelihood, indeed, oftentimes the ability to still have food and a roof over their head was dependent upon someone else's authority within the household. Their testimony was already was already considered prima facie to be suborned, that they were already under undue influence, and thus their testimony was not accepted. In the conservative movement in the modern day, recognizing that women are not in such a position, most conservative rabbis, myself included, will accept testimony from a woman. But here, what the text is trying to tell us is that even in antiquity, in any place where a single witness was accepted, in the case of the prohibitions, in the case of the aguna, of the chained woman to her dead husband, or the breaking neck of the calf, or the bitter waters, or other analogous situations, that if we would accept one witness in those cases, we would also accept the testimony of a woman or someone else that might already be disqualified, for example, somebody that is a known criminal. In these other cases, we will accept these impaired witnesses as well, except for the question of the obligation of the oath, where we will force another to take an oath because by that textual analysis, that does still need to be a fit witness as defined by the community in that generation. Phew, all right. I know that was a lot of law. I know that can feel very confusing and overwhelming. And, by all means, continue to review, look at additional commentary on all of these texts. But hopefully you understand that this basic principle of we need at least two witnesses that we are likely to trust is an essential pillar, not just of the law system in Judaism, but also of our fundamental theology about human nature, and recognizing that we do not simply bow to authority, even when it's been well earned and deserved, but instead the process must remain uniform for all people. Okay, but we're not done yet. Would be fine to wrap up there, but I got a few more minutes left and I'm going to use them. And there's a couple other topics that come up in this particular section that are always worth reminding ourselves of. These are things that you will hear in multiple places. So it is good to clear them up and make sure you understand them well. So the first goes back to our moving of the borders. And the Gemara, here we are in the Talmud, asks, and from where do we derive that when the sages have an accepted tradition, it is a substantial matter, meaning that it is something we can rely upon. So if the sages say, I was taught, that our ears perk up, we listen, and we take it as being a reliable tradition. Rabbi Chia bar Abba said that Rabbi Yochanan said, what is the meaning of that which is written from our verses? You shall not cross or move your neighbor's border, which they of old times have set in your inheritance that you shall inherit. It means you shall not cross the border that the early generation set, meaning establishing the parameters necessary for each plant, in this particular case in Shabbat. But in general, in Judaism, we are loath to undo our received tradition that we have, that we accept when it is clear with proper pedigree that it is in fact a correct tradition. One of the big jobs of the Talmud is going through and making sure that accepted traditions are in fact legitimate and correct. That once that has been established, that we do not undo it unnecessarily, except for the most egregious of situations. So this, you've heard people champion, tradition. It's not quite the same thing, because this is not saying that the casual manner of our observances, traditions, are like this. But it does mean that the received understanding of how do we know this is what the Torah means when the Torah says this, that is something that carries great weight when we say, Rabbi so-and-so said, Rabbi so-and-so said, Rabbi so-and-so interpreted this verse to mean, and it was accepted. When we make such a claim, it has great weight to it and great merit, and we shouldn't say, nah, I don't buy it casually. Now, there are plenty of times where different rabbis will argue about those interpretations, and oftentimes those are reconciled, or at least the majority opinion is given to one or the other in the later rabbinic writings, again, especially in the Talmud. But that is something that always has to be weighed very carefully and taken very seriously. So when we talk about moving the borders, we should recognize that that doesn't just mean moving the physical borders, it also means fundamentally changing the basic fabric of the accepted interpretations that Judaism has been built on for about 3,000 years. We don't move that so easily. And likewise, the next quote from Rashi, where we talk about going to the judges in your days, is a very important one, because the apparently redundant words, who shall be in those days, suggests Yiftach. I've never figured out how to pronounce his name in the English. Yiftach in his generation must be regarded as Samuel in his generation, meaning you must treat him with respect. As you can see, it's in the Talmud, and Rashi quotes this on other places as well within the Torah commentary. We're talking here about the idea that as much as we accept the received tradition of those in front of us, we also recognize that dead rabbis don't get to make decisions for you today. Yes, we absolutely look into what they have said and we follow it to the best of our ability and understanding. But at the end of the day, when we have a conundrum, we go to somebody who is alive. And even if the rabbis today, oh, they're not as good as the rabbis of yesteryear. Oh, when I was growing up, there was a rabbi that lived in my town that yada, yada, yada. Great, wonderful, probably a wonderful rabbi. Unfortunately, he passed away 50 years ago. And we can't inquire from him of what the answer should be on the topic that is under discussion, of whatever confusion there might be. Instead, we have to go to whoever is the leader in that generation. And even if they are Yiftach, which, if you know the story of Yiftach, who makes a ridiculous vow that ends up causing great problems for him and his family, even if he's of that quality and not of the quality of Samuel, who was obviously much, much better, we still have to go to the authorities we have. There isn't an alternative. We can't get out the Ouija board and hold a seance to figure out what a dead person would interpret. And more to the point, we do need to still have people today. There is never going to be a point where Judaism is finished and all you have to do is read all the books. We're always going to need living interpretation and understanding from somebody in the actual community that has the question. This is why congregations have rabbis rather than just a manual that they can consult. This is why rabbis are trained not merely to memorize what came before, the borders, if you will, but to also analyze it in a way that can give information and insight into new matters or to old matters, but in new situations. So we still have to go with who we got. And as much as we may want it to be someone else, that's not the way the world works. It's not the way Jewish law works. So hopefully you found this discussion a little insightful for the questions of Jewish law and how we figure these things out. Hopefully you've seen that it's never quite so cut and dry as we might think. And of course, that's why we need to study together and continue to learn. And hopefully we will do so for many more years to come. Take care, everyone. Be very well, and hope to see you soon. Where's the button I gotta push? Sometimes there we go.